All right, guys. Well, here we are, and it's that time of the season. We're going to sit down and talk a little bit about outdoor ethics and hunting ethics.
Blair, myself, we got Mr. Blair Bauer here, and Hutley Shepherd.
We can all share some experiences and some stories and thoughts and opinions on things, and
Maybe some agreements, some disagreements.
you never know what's going to happen, right?
More disagreements.
I think it's a topic that a lot of people, don't really get into outside of their circle of friends. And there's a lot of varying opinions on a lot of different things. And, I'm sure there's going to be a variance of opinions amongst us, but I know we've had a lot of these conversations and we align on a lot of common interests. And so, let's just sit back and have a little bit of a round table and talk about a few different things. I know one topic that we got into last night was land access, and you go and do the legwork to get permissions to get onto a property and talk to the landowner, and all of a sudden, as soon as someone else sees tire tracks, it turns into a highway and everybody figures it's fair game, and a lot of hunts get blown out that way. And for me, I sit down and put a lot of time and effort into driving around and seeing farmers and different landowners, and bring a case of beer and stop for a coffee in the morning or whatever. And I know it's gone a long way for me to get land access that way. And I don't know, how do you guys go about making sure that you get access and you're going about it the right way, and making sure that everybody's happy at the end of the day at hunting season's done? So
I think, first things first, I think actually going there in person definitely helps a guy. I'm guilty for myself. Someone call and ask me to do something or help with something. It's easier to say no over the phone. You're not there. You're not dealing with it. You don't have to worry about it. It's a simple note. Sorry, can't, hang up the phone. But yeah, you go that extra mile, make an effort, go there, make a presence, introduce yourself. If you're bringing your kids, if your kids are hunting with you, bring your kids along, whoever's there. Make sure you have with you, if it's a friend, a wife. Make sure everybody's all included. You go there, knock on a door, introduce yourself. And it usually goes a long ways. Mm-hmm. I think the old school way, it's definitely the way to go. It definitely helps me with access. I don't really believe in just picking up a phone and calling. Mm-hmm. And for one, I like knowing who I'm hunting with or whose land I'm on as well. So if I run into that landowner out in the field, I don't classify him as another hunter or, Joe Blow just walked up this cut line. No, it's actually just Fred. He's checking fences.
yeah,
Right? It's good getting familiar with the landowners.
yeah.
And you know what? There's going to be some times, like we were talking last night too, there's going to be some times where you might have to make that phone call and you're not going to be able to go there because it's going to be in the heat of the moment.
Well, yes.
Right? So it really, if you're doing your due diligence ahead of the season, which you should be doing it all year round. If you want to get permission, you should be knocking on doors all year round, not waiting until 2 weeks before hunting season.
Well, no, that's right.
And then if it happens that you do have to make that phone call in the midst of the season, let's say that this target buck jumped the fence, the neighbor beside you, give them a call. And they're either going to say yes or no, maybe explain the situation, and you'll have a better chance at maybe getting on there. I hunt a lot of private land too. I've knocked on doors and talked to lots of people, and it seems to be getting harder as the years go on to get people to actually say yes. So by going there and knocking on a door, doing it well before the season, you're definitely increasing your odds twofold, I think.
And I don't think you can assume anymore. Mm-hmm. Like if you had permission on a place the prior year, you can't assume that you have permission this current year. Yeah. You got to contact them every single year because things happen, right? Another guy might have had permission. He might have cut a fence line, left a gate open, cows got out, whatever happened. The landowner might be mad and he's like, I'm not letting you on my land. So I always make sure I got current permission. You just don't want to assume that you can be somewhere where you can't and all of a sudden you get surprised and there's hurt feelings. Guys are mad.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and land switches hands, often as well. So, it could be a family falling out. A brother got it, no longer two brothers. It's, or someone outside the circle bought the land and, no longer owns it. So it's always good to have that current current permission, make sure I keep going back that year after year after year.
Well, and you want to look at current landowner maps, right? Not just rely on an app that might have a 2-year-old map on it.
Yeah.
If your permission's current, make sure you're talking to the right person that owns that land.
And that's just it. Like, speaking of the app, we won't need to name the app, but we all know kind of which apps are out there. And it's one of those things where a lot of people go on and it says on the app, well, no permission required or whatever. Like, cause like where I hunt, it's a lot of grazing lease land. So you know what, you're supposed to be able to gain access on lease land without, you know, any pushback from the leaseholder. But at the same point, you don't know what they got going on out there. If they got cattle that they couldn't bring in time, you know, the things got a little bit delayed. Maybe they got, you know, fence issues and you know, a variety of different things. You got to touch base with the leaseholders always. I know a lot of people think that it's lease land, it's after October 13th, the cattle are supposed to be off there. I'm going to head on out anyhow, but they want to know what's going on in their leases, right? They got cattle and stuff, they're moving around, they might still be searching for some, like I said, and it's just common courtesy to follow up. I don't care if it's lease land or owned land. It's their business and livelihood, and you don't want to have a negative impact on that, right? And I know a couple of guys that got pinched for that. A lot of leases actually have put in place a lease management plan. So as a part of that, underneath that lease management plan, they can put in place, you know, stipulations like only so many people on the lease at a given time during certain days. Yeah, you got to get a little form from the leaseholder saying, I have access to this land to hunt at this land on this time of the year, so on and so forth, or this week. And there was one guy, a local guy, I don't know him, but I heard the story from one guy that I do hunt with, and they're friends, and he said he went on out, he had access to the lease the season before, but he didn't follow up with the leaseholder the next season, and this leaseholder put in a management plan, and a part of that was certain people got access to the lease on certain weeks for hunting season. So he didn't have access on that week. There was 2 other hunters out there, and he went out and harvested an elk. Well, those 2 guys got his plate, called him on in, Fish and Wildlife, come on out, took the elk, took his rifle, took his hunting access for 2 years.
Wow.
So a 15-minute phone call could have saved him a lot of headache and a lot of trouble, and for quite a few years. You know, that's something that you're never gonna to live down, that you went through that, and all because you didn't do your due diligence, and it only takes a few minutes to make a phone call or pop on by, and you know, it's something it's important to me. I know I like to phone the farmers and go and have a coffee, or phone the Hutterites and go and have a lunch or whatever, and you know, drop off, you know, even after you go and process your game, after you bring out a couple packs of jerky or something like that, goes a long ways. Guys appreciate it, and they want to see your pictures. A lot of the old farmers want to see your pictures. They love seeing, you know, the animals that you got and the experience you had, and they appreciate that. So that communication is so important, right? So
that's a big thing with the property that I normally hunt in the fall. I got permission on. I take my kids out.
Yeah.
So we're all dads here. We take our kids hunting. So it's very important to me to know the land that I'm on and to know who else could be there.
Yeah.
As a safety issue with my kids.
Yeah.
We've all run into it. We all know what happens when you drive into a field. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's private or not. As soon as you make the tracks in there, for some reason, people think that they can go in regardless if they have access or not. So that's a big thing I normally do in hunting season is I'll park my truck in plain view and I walk.
Yeah.
You will always know that I'm on that property.
Yeah.
Right? If you drive by, you know that I'm there. Half the time I have my 7-year-old son with me. So I want that truck to be there so that, I know that not very many people have access where I'm at, but that doesn't stop people. It seems to be a growing issue, which makes it very hard to continue to get permission moving forward.
Well, and that's kind of another point too, right? So you have private land, you might not be the only guy with access, or even public conservation land or something. You see a truck there, you see somebody else there, go somewhere else.
Right.
I've done that last year. My hunt was blown
Yeah.
2 days in a row, I had a plan. I'm going to this piece of conservation land, this piece of conservation land. I pull up, there's a truck there. Go to the next one, there's a truck there. It's a big chunk of land, but I'm not going to crowd the guy that's on there, and I wouldn't expect him to crowd me either, right?
Yeah.
You don't know if he's parked here and all of a sudden he's across the entire quarter where you're planning on coming in. It's just dangerous with guns, right?
Oh, 100%.
You never know.
That was the thing I ran into this season too. Is I come in and I walked in probably about 2 kilometers, and I set up and I set up my ground blind because there was a lot of traffic where I was sitting, and I was like, I'll sit here for a bit and then I'll go for a walk, right? And I was up in Crown Land, and it's a massive piece of Crown property, right? And so I was walking up and I heard a gunshot, and it had kind of come down from the south of me. So I was like, well, I'll kind of curve off and I'll head to the north so I don't disturb them, right? I don't want to get in too close on those guys, right? So I walked off onto the north, and then I wasn't seeing much. It was starting to snow and everything like that. So I turned around and come back in, and actually I got on the blood trail when I come back in. So they must have had, I'm assuming, a pretty lackluster shot, and because the blood spatter wasn't real heavy, it was inconsistent, slow drips with a bit of spray here and there, not a lot. And so I went on back up into my blind, and I kind of marked off where I saw the blood trail turn off, and I just threw a ribbon around the tree there. So when those guys come down, they finally found the blood trail and they come on down, but they walk past where I put the ribbon, and they come up to where my blind was sitting. I heard them back behind me, so I poked my head out and I said, hey, I don't know what you guys shot, but I marked the trail where blood kind of ended off and veered off down into the valley. And they're like, oh, okay. And they're like, you weren't pushing? And I said, no. I was like, I come back in quite a bit later after, but I said, like, kind of go on down there and have a look, and you probably come across some trail again, like, well, once you get through these thick trees. And there was a lot of snow, right? So it was pretty easy to spot if you were taking your time, right? I didn't stick around to see if they got it, but once I knew that they were there in the area, I'm like, well, my hunt's done for the day. So I just packed everything up and headed on out, because you don't want to put that extra pressure on and be noisy or moving around or anything when they're trying to track an injured animal, right? And so, that kind of comes down to hunting on Crown property too. You come across other hunters and show your care and respect back and forth to each other. And you know what? Like, if they got an injured animal and they're tracking down, there's no point in sticking around.
Yeah.
Give them their room or give them a hand. But there was 3 of them. I didn't need to stick around and help out. They had it covered. So
Yeah.
I just packed up and went on home and called it a day. And you know what? Hopefully they ended up recovering it at the end of the day. But I guess we won't know that story.
Crown land's always tricky, right? Because it can turn into a highway, and
Well, yeah, that's just it. It's some days it's a free for all,
Yeah.
and the later you get into season, people get pressured. You see these guys, flood those areas, and then that's where you see guys cutting corners, going in places they're not supposed to be, and that's what it really boils down to. Those Crown places get hit quite hard because of that reason. It's a free for all. Everyone's allowed to go in there. But yeah, like you said, like Blair was saying, I've found myself as well. You go to a certain area, there's vehicles, just
Move on.
back up, give them their space.
Breeze by.
Plan B.
And I'd expect them to do it the same as me, or to me, so that's my rule of thumb as well.
unfortunately, there's a lot of guys out there that won't do that.
Yeah.
Well, no, and I understand some of that as well, because who knows, he might not have a full back pocket of places he can go. Right? He might only get that one Saturday, Sunday with his kids, and he wants to make the best of it. So you got to take everything in consideration. But yeah, like in most cases, there is people that don't care about nothing other than themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
And that's a problem for it's hard on the hunting community, because those are the ones that make the mistakes and cost for everybody else, right?
Well, yeah, the whole community itself.
And not saying we're perfect neither. Nobody's perfect when it comes to that stuff, but at least try to be as considerate as you can.
Well, yeah.
Put a little extra care and attention into your own hunting plan, and having a backup in case, like you come across somebody else that you can adjust and go and utilize another area, right? And that kind of comes down to, we were talking about it yesterday too. Like I lost a lot of access this year because there were guys who didn't have permission hunting on posted land, and they come up onto the quarter adjacent to the home quarter, and they were shooting towards the house. So the landowners just went and locked all the gates, and that was it for the season. Didn't matter if I'd hunted there for the last 6 years. It's done.
It's his
Story.
land. It's his land.
And I phoned up and I'm like, hey, I'm just, you know what? That's kind of my last resort spot. And I don't usually hunt down there, but I phoned them up and I was like, hey, you know what? Like, can I come on out and hunt? And just, no, Blair, sorry, not this year. We're locking everything down because we had some, guys without permission. They were shooting up towards the house, and it's not a comfortable position for us to be in. They're leaving gates open, and all the neighbors in this area have kind of got together and just said, we've had enough, and we're shutting down the gates and no one's coming in. And so, if you see anything out on the stubble field, by all means, but if it's in the pasture, sorry, you're out of luck. And you got to respect that. Yeah. But like I said, the same day I went down because I got permission from the Hutterites to hunt down there, and it was the same day, and I saw like 40 or 50 deer bedded down on the side of the hill. And I was just glassing them, and I was trying to call this landowner to get permission. And because I didn't really plan on hunting on that quarter, but just so happened that's where they were that day. And so I was phoning and no answer. And I left a message, and I was like, well, I'll run on up to their place and see if I can get permission. Well, as soon as I said that, this truck pulled on up, and they rolled down the window, and I rolled down the window. We're talking, and they're like, well, do you want to team up, and we'll go on out there and we'll each get a deer? And there's two of them, and there's me and my miss with me. And I was like, do you guys got permission? And they're like, no. I said, well, you can't hunt on there, it's posted land. And I said, but the phone number's on the fence. So I was trying to get a hold of them, but there's no answer. But I know where their land location is on the county map, so I'll just run on up there and maybe I can get permission. And we left, and I come back, and I thought, well, maybe they got tired of bedding down and they'll move on to the Hutterite land, which I had access on, and maybe I could, harvest something, because they weren't home when I got over to their place. So I pulled up there, and then the conservation officer pulled up and pulled me over. I was parked, but he pulled up and come out and talked to me and checked my permit, or my license, and checked my tags and checked my firearm and everything. And as soon as he was done checking my firearm, those guys drove by in their truck, and the conservation officer said, there's deer in the back of that truck. And so he jumped in his truck and drove away, and I kind of got organized again and put all my stuff away, and we pulled up and left. And when we drove by, he had 4 deer in the box of his truck. So 2 guys, 4 deer.
No permission.
Figure it out, right?
Yeah.
So what does that do to the hunting community? Really paints a negative picture. And those are stigmas that it's really hard for the 95% of people who are doing all the right things to overcome that 5% that's not doing all the right things. And, it's going to ruin it for everybody.
Yeah. Well, and the problem is we're already looked down upon. The hunting community is already looked down upon by so many people.
Yeah.
Right now, our firearms rights are under attack right now. Yeah. And then every bad apple just adds fuel to that fire. Mm-hmm. We don't need fuel added to the fire that we're trying to fight right now, because as hunters, as legal firearms owners, mm-hmm. we have a battle that we're fighting right now, and we're going to be continuing to fight, I think, in who knows how long. I don't think it's ever going to stop. We're going to have to fight, or else your children, my children, our great-grandchildren aren't going to be able to hunt, because there's going to be nothing left. Yeah. First off, there's going to be no crown land to hunt. Yeah. So they're going to take that. There's going to be no firearms that we can use to hunt with, because they're going to take all those. Yeah. So we really need to think, when we're out in the woods and in these situations, maybe we should take the high road all of the time, follow all of the rules, which will make that fight easier in the long run. Yeah. Because it's not getting any easier. I love seeing conservation officers out there and talking to conservation officers when they come up to check me. I know the rules, I know the regulations. I'm not off by heart, but I know most of them, as should most hunters out there. Yeah. We know the rules out of a motor vehicle, all of that stuff. So when they pull up to my vehicle, I'm not nervous.
No.
I'm never nervous to see them because I know that I'm following all the rules.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. The last couple of years I've been pulled over by the conservation officers, and I've talked to them. I've had my kids with me both times.
Mm-hmm.
The first time I had deer in the box of the truck, the second time I didn't, but every time I had kids with me, and it was a great experience because the conservation officer got to talk to me, and my kids got to see that, hey, as long as we're following the rules, there's nothing to worry about.
Yeah.
And that's the thing too, the rules change, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
When I was young, growing up with my dad going hunting, if the land was posted, you don't drive on it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I know that there's a guy that owns this field, we can drive on in because there's no posted land. Well, it's not like that anymore.
Yeah.
If you don't have access, you can't go on there. Petty Trespassing Act.
Yeah.
You have to have permission to enter that land,
Mm-hmm.
no matter what. And some guys maybe don't realize that or don't follow the rules, and they aren't up on that. But that's why you have to have permission to access anyone's land.
Well, and
wherever
that's
you're
the
going
thing. Just because you see tire tracks doesn't mean you can drive on there.
Yeah.
Because that farmer could be out there feeding grain or feeding hay or sorting cattle or doing anything, right? He could be down there fixing fence. He might be hunting himself. So just because you see tire tracks doesn't mean you get to drive on down there.
Next time on SG Adventures.
We're doing this kind of chat, kind of open room.
Woodshed chat.
Yeah, it's a woodshed chat.
Always get permission. Always ask hey, is it okay if I drive down there? Put this up in your window. No one's going to bug you. If you don't have it up in your window, you're going to have an issue.
Read the regulations, guys. You might not have to read them cover to cover.
Crown land doesn't mean it's the Wild West.
Call. Don't go on Facebook
Yeah.
and ask, because you're going to get 700 other people that also don't know the regulation.
Well, there was a year I was sheep hunting. A year later, that trail I was on was shut down. No more ATV access ever.
Basically, it boils down to clean up your
Clean up your mess.